I took the vow on the morning of my coronation, while the frost was still hard on the yardstones, and Garth was leaning against my leg, as though he already knew what I was about to say. No mate, no bond. Halvanmir had buried 2 kings in 10 years. One lost to a war he started for a woman's sake. One lost to grief when the bond severed before its time. I was 22 years old, newly crowned, and I had watched both of them go. So I made the vow in the cold before the assembled hold, with Garth as my only witness who counted, and then I spent 9 winters keeping it without particular difficulty. Garth helped. He would not let women near him, not the court ladies who brought dried meat, not the healers who offered to trim his coat in summer, not the young Omega who sat in the wolf yard every Thursday for an entire season and read aloud, presumably believing that patience was the same thing as a strategy. He simply walked to the far end of the yard and lay down with his back to them until they stopped coming. I was grateful for his consistency. It saved me the trouble of setting expectations myself. He fell ill in the first hard week of autumn, when the cold came down from the northern pass faster than anyone expected. Not gravely. Garth had never been gravely anything in his life, but his breathing was wrong, a low rasp I had never heard from him, and the hold-standing healer admitted within the hour that wolf lung in a great wolf of Garth's age and size was past her knowledge. She sent for a traveling healer who wintered in the village of Crestwick, 40 miles south, known apparently for knowing wolves. The message went out the same morning. I did not sleep especially well that night, which I noted without examining too closely. I did not meet her the day she arrived. She went directly to the wolf yard, and the stable hand told me afterward that she had sat down on the cold ground outside Garth's pen, not inside it, and waited. She had not spoken to him. She had not offered anything. She had simply sat there in the frost, with her healer's case on her knees, until Garth got up and came to the pen gate himself to look at her. He let her in. I heard this, and felt something shift behind my ribs. Not large, only noticeable. The way a floorboard gives slightly under a foot, and you think, I should have that looked at. Her name was Wren. She was perhaps 28, with the manner of someone who had been working outdoors in cold weather for a long time, and had arrived at a settled peace with it. She told my steward on the first day that she expected to stay through the winter. Garth's lung needed 3 months of consistent treatment, and interrupting the course would undo whatever progress the first weeks made. My steward asked if she required anything from the hold. She said she required access to the wolf yard at dawn and dusk, a supply of dried moss root and heather oil, and a room that was not cold. That was all. No other requests. No mention of the king. I told myself this was simply professional comportment. I had known healers before, focused people, spare with their words, oriented entirely toward the patient. That was what she was. Nothing unusual. I began going to the wolf yard in the evenings. I told myself I was checking on Garth. This was not entirely untrue. But Garth's breathing improved within the first 2 weeks, and the visits continued for 3 months, which is longer than any reasonable monitoring required. She was usually there when I arrived, sometimes treating him, sometimes simply sitting near him in the lamplight while he slept, with a book or a piece of mending in her hands. She would look up when I came in and say something brief about his progress. She did not stand. She did not perform. When I asked questions, she answered them directly, and then returned to what she had been doing, which was a thing almost no one in the hold did when I entered a room. On the 19th evening, I sat down on the fence rail across from her, which I had not done before. She glanced at me once, and then back at Garth. We were quiet for a while. The torch at the yard post was burning low, and neither of us moved to fix it, and I noticed, without particular alarm, that the quiet between us was not uncomfortable in the way quiet usually was with people I did not know well. It was simply quiet. Garth was breathing with the slow, even depth of a wolf who is healing and knows it. He trusts you, I said. It was not what I had intended to say. I had not intended to say anything. He decided to, she said. I didn't ask him to. I thought about that longer than made sense. Garth watched me across the yard with his great amber eyes, and the look on his face was the one I had learned over 9 years, meant he considered the matter already settled and was simply waiting for me to catch up. My steward asked me, somewhere in the 6th week, whether I wished him to suggest to the healer that she might use the small council library for her evenings rather than sitting in the cold yard. I told him no. He asked nothing further, though I saw him add something to the leather ledger he carried, which I assumed was a note to himself about the nature of kings and their self-awareness. He had been in my service 12 years. He was entitled to the note. December came. The hold filled with the preparations for the winter solstice gathering, the 4-day feast when every pack family within a day's ride came to Halvanmere, when the great yard was lit with torch pillars, and the tables ran to the outer wall and the whole place was too loud and too warm, and exactly what my father had always called the best 4 days of the year. I had run it well for 9 winters. I had never once stood at the edge of it thinking about a woman in a wolf yard 40 feet away. She stayed for the gathering. I had not asked her to. Garth's treatment was nearly complete, and she could reasonably have left. But she was still in the hold when the first guests arrived, and still there on the evening of the solstice itself, standing near the yard gate with a cup of something warm, and watching the torches come up. I saw her from across the crowd. She was not watching me. She was watching the torches, with a quiet on her face that I recognized as contentment, not performance, because I had been observing her long enough to know the difference. I did not go to her. I moved through the crowd and spoke to the pack elders, and accepted their seasonal reports, and nodded at the appropriate moments, and did not look toward the yard gate more than once every quarter hour, which I considered a reasonable measure of restraint. My steward, who was tracking me with the calm peripheral attention of a man who has learned to anticipate a king's surprises, said nothing. He simply stayed closer than usual, which was his way of telling me he was paying attention. Then Garth moved. He was in his pen. The gate was latched from the outside, which had never stopped him, and he pushed it open without hurry, and walked through 400 people who parted for him, the way water parts for a stone, because Garth at full size in a crowd produced that effect without any effort on his part, and he walked directly to Wren, and sat down in front of her, and put his great head in her hands. The yard went quiet. Not silent. The musicians were still playing somewhere near the east wall, and children were still laughing near the fire, but the people near them stopped talking, one by one, as they understood what they were seeing. Garth, who had kept every woman at the far end of a yard for 9 years. Garth, who had made the Lady of Fenwick cry with the thoroughness of his disinterest during the autumn council visit. Garth, who had once walked directly through a circle of 12 noblewomen, as though they were weather. Garth had his head in her hands, and his eyes were closed. I felt the mate mark before I saw it, a warmth on the inside of my left wrist, then the right, the kind of warmth that is not temperature but arrival, the way a room changes when the person you have been waiting for, without knowing you were waiting, walks through the door. I looked down. The mark was gold, both wrists, the old faded bond sign that had not appeared in Halvanmere in 3 generations. Wren looked down at her own wrists and then up at me, and her expression was not shock. It was the face of someone for whom a thing has been confirmed that they had already, quietly, suspected. There was no performance in it. There had never been any performance in her. That was, I understood in the same moment, the entire point. I walked through the crowd. They parted for me the way they had parted for Garth, though I was less large and rather more self-conscious about it, and I stopped in front of her and Garth, who did not lift his head, but opened one amber eye to observe my approach, and I thought, you have been impossible about women for 9 years, and you chose to make your feelings known at the solstice gathering in front of 400 people. His eye closed again. He was not remotely sorry. I made a vow, I said to her. My voice was steadier than I deserved. I know, she said. I heard about it the first week. I meant it, when I made it. I believe you, she said, and then, with a care that was not soft exactly, only true. What did you swear against? I had not been asked that before. In 9 years, no one had thought to ask it. I opened my mouth and then closed it, because the answer I had been carrying all that time, a bond that breaks you, a mate mark that becomes a wound, a love that a king cannot afford, sat in my chest and did not fit the moment. It did not fit her. She had not asked me to look at her. She had not once arranged herself to be seen. She had come into my wolf yard and tended my wolf, and sat with a book in the lamplight, and she had not needed me to choose her in order to simply be what she was, which was the exact shape of the thing I had apparently been afraid of without knowing it was a shape. I swore against the version of it that costs everything, I said at last. I don't think that's what this is. She looked at me steadily for a long moment. Then she said, I wasn't going to ask you for anything. I know, I said. That's why I'm standing here. Garth exhaled. It was the exhale of an animal who has been waiting on a slow student for the better part of a season, and is prepared to be gracious about it now that the conclusion has arrived. I held out my hand, palm up, the old way. An offer, not a claim. She could take it, or fold her own hands and tell me the mark meant nothing, and walk to Crestwick in the morning, and I would have no right to follow. That was what the offer meant. I had always understood that. I simply had never had occasion to make it until now. She looked at my hand. She looked at the marks on our wrists, gold in the torchlight, the same on both of us. She looked at Garth, who had still not moved his head, and had the bearing of a creature who considered his work here essentially complete. She placed her hand in mine. The hold went fully, deeply quiet. Not the half-silence of surprise, but the other kind. The warmth that moves through 400 people at once when they witness something they will tell their grandchildren about. I did not look at them. I was looking at her. I said her name before the assembled hold, and then her title, which was Luna of Halvenmere, and the hold answered together, in the old way, a sound like a door opening onto a room that has been waiting a long time to be used. Later, after the torches had burned low, and the guests had found their beds, I sat in the wolf yard with Garth's great head on my knee, and thought about the 9 years, and the vow, and the specific morning I had made it, and whether the younger man on those frost-hard stones would have understood what I was trying to protect. He would not have, I decided. He was protecting himself against loss, and what he had found was something that had walked in through the gate, without his permission, and sat down and waited, without asking to be seen, and he had gone, evening after evening, to a cold yard where a woman read a book in the lamplight, and he had been the one who could not stay away. Garth huffed once, the sound that meant he was comfortable and done thinking for the night. I had known him 9 years, he had known her 3 months, and he had been more certain the whole time. I thought that was probably right.